We'll begin this week by talking a little bit about Chapter 10, which dealt with power and exerting interpersonal influence. A lot of assumptions are held in regard to power. For example, many of you may be uncomfortable when you hear that word because you immediately think of power abuses. But I want to review certain assumptions related to the way that we conceive of power within communication and studying communication. And basically, when certain perceptions or ways of doing things become normative, that is, the way that we expect them to be done, the way that we just think things are done, the way things are, the way reality is, then alternative perceptions or alternative ways of doing things, alternative realities, these things become marginalized. For example, there is an excellent narrative that has been published in several different communication journals and deconstructed and analyzed for its ideology and power that was produced from IBM. And the story goes a little something like this. A temporary worker who was a female, young, very short, and unassuming employee who was given an oversized employee uniform for her temporary work there, checked ID badges going into a secure area in the facilities. And she, when a group of people were approaching, didn't think twice about asking them for their IDs. And when one man said, "I don't have an ID," she said, "Well, I can't let you through." And the rest of the men standing around him, much larger, much more authoritarian looking than she was, with their suits on opposed to her uniform that she was wearing, they replied, "Don't you know who he is? He's the CEO." And she said, "I'm sorry, I just started working here and I don't know who he is, and the rules are that you need a badge." The CEO stopped them and said, "The rules are the rules. She's right. I need to go get my badge." He went, got his badge, came back through, and was let through. And she was praised for adherence to the rules. Now think about this story. What does the retelling of the story do? Well, the retelling of the story reminds us all that we play by the rules. And it reinforces it not just for the CEO, but for everybody. And to not question the rules, but to just adhere to them. And that sort of way of thinking about things would then put any alternatives, like exceptions to the rules or breaking of the rules, into irrational, unacceptable behavior, and then there can never be a good reason for it. So that's just one illustration that has us looking at, especially in organizations, how certain things become normative. Power rests with those who shape meaning for others. And this is not just at the organizational level, this is in our interpersonal relationships as well. Those who can shape meaning, those whose stories can be understood, heard, accepted, are going to have more power than those who cannot and who don't. For example, in the workplace, a manager is going to have power to shape how policies are produced, reproduced, and even transformed. They get to write the policies in many cases. And management is going to interpret them and then dole out the discipline if people don't adhere to them. And so in terms of your position at work, if you have a manager who's over you, then you very much understand how your relationship is power-based, and the legitimate authority that they have has implications for your ongoing relationship. But even in your maybe family relationships, think how it affects you in the family when you have interactions with your parents, who in many cases have authority over you because you still have financial ties to them. And so you have less autonomy, and how that shapes your relationship. And if you were to ask anybody where the power lies, they would probably look and think it's the parents in the relationship for most college-age students. So there are a number of different examples and illustrations how we can see power played out. But there are different types of power, and you need to understand those different types of power. Some view power in a macro sense, and that is we see the relationships of power in society. And a lot of sociologists and even communication scholars look into this, but there's also micro views of power that are going to demonstrate how power is achieved communicatively and contextually within interpersonal relationships. Interpersonal influence is the symbolic effort to preserve or change the attitudes or behaviors of others. And so we exert this influence in the hopes of being very persuasive. Interpersonal power is the potential that you're going to have to change other people's attitudes, beliefs, behaviors. And Within our different relationships, your interpersonal power is going to fluctuate. At times you might have more, at times you might have less. At times you might be more persuasive, at times you might be less persuasive. In looking at the typology of different powers, there are primarily 5 different kinds of power: coercive, reward, legitimate, expert, and referent. Beginning with coercive, most of us are going to immediately think of force and actually using your force to convince somebody to do something. This is not just the actual overt use of force. It can be the implicit use of force, in that there is a perceived potential that the other person could overpower you, and so you perceive them as being coercive. So if someone is a very large demeanor, they are taller than you are, they have more muscles than you are, and you feel like they could overpower you, they may not be intentionally exerting coercive power, but they may be implicitly exerting coercive power because of the potential you feel like they have over you. And that is a very interesting type of power to look at, because in many cases the person who is perceived to have coercive power would never have thought to themselves that they have this kind of power. Reward power is the type of power in which you are able to give somebody something that they want. And in relationships, this is true. We can give other people what they want in terms of watching a movie they want to see. We can reward them. Like, for example, I know my son loves it if I reward him with chocolate. That's his thing, he just wants a piece of chocolate, and it's like, oh, that's the best reward for him. Or just being able to sit down and visit, that's a great reward for him because he gets to talk and he loves to talk. But it depends on the other person, right? Because rewards are going to be different for each partner. You have legitimate power, and that is a position or a title. This is most often found in the workplace. You also have expert power, and that is the perceived expertise of another person. Whether or not they actually have it or not is in question. And then you have referent power, which is going to be related to the charisma and the attractiveness. And remember, attractiveness is not just physical attractiveness. There's lots of different types of attractiveness. We studied this a number of chapters ago, including social attractiveness and task attractiveness. And so these are the 5 types of power. You can have multiple types of power simultaneously, or you can exert one type of power at a time.